Hey gang, welcome back. It is I, DrBossKey, and today I thought we'd do a tips and tricks video for Shmup Creator on how we implemented dialog boxes into our game and what that looks like. So I want to jump on over and first, let me just show you what we wound up doing. I'm really happy with what we wound up achieving. It was a little bit fiddly to try to get to it in this in the engine, but we did it. So let me just run this real quick so you can see it. This is a basic video.
Captain's log. I'm placing the Veil Piercer starship on autopilot to get my hands dirty collecting monster soul bits.
Weapon system.
How was that?
Weapon system. Top weapon, rapid fire. Great for dealing with low health enemies. Bottom weapon, power shot. This is great.
Okay, so the cool parts about this are, I'm going to frame step through this. I want to show you because we're talking about animation. This is the important part, right? So, so here you can see that I have a frame, so we're frame stepping through the video here. And you can see that the first thing that happens is that I have this sort of like intro animation, right? That fills in the dialog box. So it's kind of this like, growing effect. You saw it in real time. And as I frame step through this, you can see the dialog box has an animation as well. And then we start with a text for the top, Veil Piercer Starship. We fill in the portrait of the character for the dialogue itself. In our case, the text for the narration appears. So slow.
Pilot to get my hands.
All right, and then we basically have this collapse animation for its outro. So it's basically a death animation, but I'll show you how we built this in a second. So here you can see that then we have basically it folds back up and then off we go, right?
Monsters.
So how did we do this? Let me just minimize this video. Okay. So let's see here. All right. So in our particular case, and this is just because you could do this with, I think with regular text elements, but we wanted to be able to essentially have the ability to interact with dialog boxes. In the game, most of the time you shoot dialog boxes because we treat them as enemies, or you want to be able to spawn or remove dialog boxes. So, and the enemy type works really well. You could also do it with text boxes, but I think there are a few other gotchas that come with that, but this is more, we're just going to focus on this here. So, okay. So first off, the most important thing is that it's an enemy, right? And then we have some logic here, which basically is a trigger property. And then it becomes active when viewed by the camera, which is when we start in this particular case, but you could set it up to be anything if you wanted to, like a trigger volume, player goes into the zone. There's a bunch of other things. You can do it on a timer, but anyways, that's how we set up. This is the very first dialogue you see in the tutorial level. Then we have a timer, which is just for us. We set it to 1.8 because that felt pretty good with spawning into the world after a level load, and then not taking too long to spawn the dialogue. And then this does, once this 1.8 seconds elapses, we stay activated, no reason not to in this case. And then we do a thing, which is we basically have a sound effect that we play, which is a little, right? Like that for basically the dialogue spawning. And then we also do a couple things where we have a, let's see here. Right. Okay. Yeah. So, and then what we have is we have a text game object property. And this one here is switch mode, but play until the end because we want to have a full cycle. This then goes to, it basically, we set the duration to 0 because it needs to be very short because it's just there to do the intro animation. And then what we have it set to is your sizing, animation speed, and then we have columns and rows. So let me just real quick, I'll pop over and take us to show you what that asset setup looks like. Let's see, this is a picture. So this is going to be in the pictures asset directory and it's called cutscene. All right, cool. So, and this is cutscene intro left. We did mirroring because we have two. So let me just, let's see. So you can see here's the setup. And this is basically a sprite sheet. I'm just going to make this white so it's easier to see. And basically you can see here that it's an 8-frame animation, right? And you can see here that basically the first frame is just this little nodule bit, right? And then we have essentially the transmission window, which then starts here. The backing for the plate starts to fade in, and we have this animation where we have this kind of like back and forth, and just to keep the dialogue to be lively. And so you can see basically as we progress through this that then we get to the final frame, and we only want this to play once, and then we transition. So that's what that asset looks like. So that's where we're at here. And then the other thing, so what we do, right, is so we start that, and then let's see. So that stays activated. Yeah, so we have this dialogue that fires here. All right, okay, cool. And then, so that's the intro animation, and then what happens after that? So after that, we also have another timer that we start because we wanted to control kind of the duration for text. So we come down here after about 0.7 seconds because that's the intro dialogue animation fade up. Then we want to start basically we start text. So this is the main text, but also we have in here the let's see, what's this guy? Right, okay. Yeah, so we have the body text that we start here. And then we have the image. 1 second. Okay, and we're back. Okay, so yeah, I just had to refresh myself a little bit with the logic here. So just from the top. So then we have the triggers viewed by camera. And then we have a countdown timer that stays activated after 1.8 seconds is what we chose in our case. We do a couple things. So one is we trigger the cutscene intro animation, which we've set up as essentially an image for it with a text property. We've set this to world position in order to align the size. We've just did it manually in this case. You could do it globally if you want it, but the size and position with the enemy. So again, this is the enemy plate, right? And we just covered that for the intro animation. And then the other thing that we do, back to this real quick, is rendering order we set to automatic, which is totally fine, because it disappears as soon as the as soon as it plays. So then what happens is that the intro animation plays for the dialogue, and then down here we also, because we wanted to adjust this a little bit, a couple things happen. So one is we set a timer, and the timer stays active, and after 0.7 seconds, and you can fiddle with all this stuff too, we basically spawn the enemy dialogue, because it's about the right time in which the intro animation is finished. Also, by the way, for a 4-frame animation, we so we set duration to 0. We made sure it's a picture. We use this size because that fit with the enemy size in the world. We set the animation speed at 8 frames to 1.5, which felt pretty good. And then you just set your columns and your rows, because you saw the sprite sheet for that. So, and again, it's set to world position so we can manually align stuff, because I wanted to be able to play with that. Okay, and then what happens from here? So the enemy cutscene dialogue spawns, which is what this guy is doing here. So, and you can see this here. So this goes right into the enemy like you would do normally. And then once the enemy dialogue is awake, you have a trigger condition, and this is the important part. A trigger condition which is set to switch mode, and the connected entity state, which is your enemy dialogue in this case, is all alive, because once it's alive, we wanted to do a few other things. So one of those things we want to do is once the enemy dialogue, or once we'll call it enemy dialogue, is alive, then we want to, in our case here, we trigger the voice narration, right? So this is the voice line for that as well. And in this case, we wanted to set it to switch mode, but play until the end. I will go over a special case later on, but this is, we set it this way because when you kill the dialogue, we, since we have time, we didn't want to cut off the voice line being played. So, and then we do this other thing, which is then we spawn the title of the dialogue. Again, this is just manual line in this case. And then we're in a waiting state, right? So now, and what you can see here, so this is the waiting state.
Captain's log. I'm placing the Veil Piercer starship on autopilot to get my hands dirty collecting monster soul bits.
And so nothing happens at this point until the player flies over to that area, and then we actually do a few other pieces of logic. So then, this is special to our case, but you can see what the main concepts are, and then you can tweak it for your own. So, but we have a trigger here, which is basically when the player goes into the zone, and this in this case is we're going to stay active because we don't want to re-trigger it every time you go in and out. And then a couple things happen. One is we trigger a kill condition. So to then destroy the dialogue. And then we also, in our case, we basically activate moving the camera forward. So you set up scrolling in this case. And that's pretty much it. So that's the front part of the setup. So the other cool things, if you look at the enemy dialogue here, right? So what we've done, because you have the outro animation, right? So the outro animation is basically, and this is the only way you can really trigger like a really nice snappy on removal of the enemy effect. So we essentially set up a death explosion. So, and this, we call it cutscene outro L, right? So if I come over to, let's see, I think first it's the particle, right? So cutscene, oh, I think we don't actually have to set up a particle for this, do we? Just double checking. No, so just explosion in the editor. In the explosion editor, so we have a cutscene outro. Do we say left? Yeah. Cool. And this is super, super simple. So you add a sprite element. So again, if you take a look at where we were, so we have the cutscene intro, and then we have a cutscene outro. So let's take a look. See, and now because it's a sprite element. See, where do we put that? Let me go find it real quick. All right, and we found it. And so in the explosion editor, when you add a sprite element, you come to your particles folder, and because basically particles are what fuel your explosions, but you can also add them as sprite elements, and so you don't really need to create a particle. You could create this as a particle and then add it to the explosion editor, but this is one of the ways you can do it. So, and you can see here, we basically have a cutscene outro left, and same thing. Bloop. All right. So, and basically all we do is we just reverse the animation, right? So you can see the difference between the two. So you have the intro, right? Toot, 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 toot. And now you have the outro, which then essentially unwinds the animation. So you can see that you have the full sprite or the full dialogue plate. It's doing its course frame by frame animations, but you can see here that after about 4 frames, we start to do a close to wind up. It's only like 4 for 1, 2, 3, 4, where then the animation closes that way. So that gives you the really nice sort of like on close. So now the best part is that because this has been added to an enemy, and that's what our dialogue is, then because you have the death explosion, you now have the ability to, once you've destroyed the dialogue, you have an immediate like outro animation. So, and I think that is the main things. Okay, so let me just double check here. So, and of course, our particular case, we didn't want to give any score or hit score or any other things you would do. We turned off item spawns. It was just using the explosion there. There's no other special setups here. We don't need collision on the dialogue. We don't want to, in this particular case, because most of our dialogues are shootable, but in this case, I needed the player to fly to this area on screen in order to achieve that, in order to achieve the dialogue closing. So we make a special case there. But normally you just shoot the dialogues as you saw in the video. So, and then what else? Is there anything else? No wave spawns. Gameplay bits. I think those are really the main things. And then let me see. The other thing, let's go back to the explosion. So the other thing that you have here too, right, is we really wanted to have a little and then a little like just a little sci-fi sound effect for the dialogue spawning and despawning. And so here we just added a little cutscene outro wave file as an explosion sound. Totally works. Okay, I think that is the main thing there. So let me just double check my bits here. So the other thing I wanted to talk to you about that is also a neat little consideration, and I mentioned this before, right? If we watch the video,
Soul bits.
So
Starship on autopilot.
So you can see here when we despawn the dialogue that the voice line continues. We didn't want to immediately cut it off, but we have later on in the video. So we have later on in the video here. I'll show you this.
Rapid fire. Great for dealing with low health enemies.
So our case was that when you have a dialogue after another dialogue, just like if you're doing cutscenes, if you give the player the ability to skip the dialogue, then you don't want to necessarily have the dialogue lines stack on top of each other, right? The voice lines. So, and you can see here.
Bottom weapon. Power shot. This is great.
And there we immediately cut off.
Automatic weapon.
Because we have another dialogue prompt. So, and this is actually fairly easy to achieve. It's funny, I'm clicking on the video like I'm going to do something there. Okay, so the way we achieve the cutoff, let me just really quick take a look. Okay, we're back. All right, so the way that we achieve cutting off the dialogue was basically, so we have here, I had to show different versions. So what we have here is the voice line is set to switch mode, which means you can turn on and off, which is super important, as opposed to switch mode but play until the end. And what we do is we have in the trigger condition, when the dialogue is destroyed, connected entity state is all alive. So then what happens is that the connected enemy state is no longer alive, and as a result, it fires the reverse signal, which says, oh, it's dead, which is a nice little, like, you don't really figure these things out until you played with the system a little bit. But what happens is that then sets the ability to set another signal switch through all of your logic to then basically cut off the voice line that's being played. Super, super helpful in this case. I think that's it. So maybe I'll show you just a real quick thing as I've been, so that's one implementation there. So, and then if I go to the cutscene level that I've been working on, do not want to save this because I've been messing around. And I'm still refining this, like, you know, like your workflows and how you come back in to change things is always tough. But essentially here, what I wound up doing is I just started scripting from the start, a trigger condition, each of the essentially timer values that then set up dialogues. So in this case, right, I'll show you this real quick.
Instance 237 is out of balance and needs your attention, DrBossKey. Please follow up on the investigation before...
All right. So in here, it's a slightly different style of cutscene. It's more cinematic in this case. And all we wind up doing here, right, is we have a trigger condition when we start the level. In this case, could be anything. But when viewed by the camera, we have a timer to control when we want to start. I usually always put a timer in, even if it's 0.1 seconds, because if you ever need to go back and change it, it's better... it's better to have flexible timing. Maybe you want a longer black screen. Maybe you want a bunch of other things. It's hard to say, right? So, and then what happens here is from that, we do a couple things. So in this case, right, we spawn, yeah. So in this case, we wound up doing effects, particles for the Hall Wizards, and this is a slightly different thing, so I don't want to get too deep into this, but using the particle system, we do it because I wanted to fade up on the image. There's a couple ways you could do this. If you want to just have an image, you could do a reverse fade, but I digress. So, but more importantly, I'm not gonna take a look here. Why is that? I got that bug again. Interesting. Okay, but I'm not gonna mess around. We got stuff going. So in this case, right, we just have a timer. We have a voice line that stays active, and this does a couple things. So once each one of the lines happens, we have the voice line itself. We have the subtitle backing. You can't really see this very well because it's, but you can see it on screen. And this I used I used global positioning, so then I can always have everything in the same place. And then you can see the text line that sits on top of the voice line backing. And then after we've cycled through that, we also have then, what is this guy here? All right, so we wind up using a timer for the different effects. So then we keep them alive for a certain amount of time and then kill them after that. So that's for the DrBossKey when he's fading out. And again, I'll do another video on this. But I think the most important thing is if you come down here and you take a look, I have all of these kind of mini dialogues, which use the same concept you're using before. But just to give you a sneak peek, essentially this is all just like timer madness. And then, you know, a good thing to do, right, is like name your scenes, have your transition bits, break your cutscenes up into chunks, so then they're easier to iterate through when you come back to it. But it's basically, so for instance, for scene 3 start, we show the island in the background for a period of time. We wind up killing it. We use basically these big images are kind of like our billboards. They are all enemy types. So then we have the ability to spawn and destroy them as needed, right? Super important. And then for the most part, it's just taking that same logic we established for setting the dialogue lines, the timers, when to remove them, and then just essentially filtering through. We don't have any ability to skip through this stuff. It's a very short cutscene in general. I could add that if I wanted to, just to end the level, or I could add it to like let the player skip through dialogue lines, but it's a different use case. And more importantly, you want to take the same techniques that you kind of learned from here and apply those to your own design thinking. So, and once you've kind of designed for those cases, player skipping, player in level, right, and understanding how to do that. And I'll do another video on that later on, but those things are going to help you create the building blocks for creating your cutscenes. Okay. I know this is kind of dense, a little bit complicated. If you have any questions, leave them down in comments, or hop on over to the Shmup Creator Discord server, where we often are helping each other out and making cool stuff and doing our best. I will speak to you all next time. Thanks, everybody.